Hello. Hello, everyone. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to our live lesson. I see many of you are already telling me where you're from in the live chat. We're going to wait just a moment while other viewers join in. While we wait, tell us where you're watching from. I've already seen some students watching from Japan, from Russia, Ukraine, Italy. And how is everyone today? Tell me how you're doing. Are you ready to learn about some modal verbs today? Hello to Egypt. Hi to India, to Korea. Hi, Poland. Hello to Kenya, Tanzania, Somalia. Hi, Pakistan. Wait, just one more moment. Hello to Turkey. Hello, Vietnam. Hi, Germany. Wonderful. We have viewers from all over the world today. Okay, we are going to get started now. So good morning again, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what time it is, wherever you're watching from. My name is Molly. I am a tutor on Cambly. I am from the United States, but I live in the small country of Ecuador. Not sure if we have any viewers today from Ecuador. And today we are going to be covering the topic modal verbs. Okay, modal verbs. So does anyone know what modal verbs are? First, we'll talk a minute about what they are. So modal verbs typically are referred to as helping verbs. And we use modal verbs to show if we believe something is certain, is possible, or maybe impossible. We also use them to talk about things like abilities, to ask permission, to make requests or offers. Modal verbs are different than normal verbs, which is why they have a different name. So one way they're different is that when we are using a modal verb in third person singular, we don't add an S to it. It stays the same always. And another way it's different is that typically it's followed by the base form of another verb. Okay, so there are many modal verbs in the English language, but today we are just going to focus on four of them. So we're going to look at the differences between them and also how they are used. Okay, so today we're going to talk about can and could, and also must and have to. We're going to start with can and could, look at how they're used and the difference between them. So if you have had any experience speaking with a native speaker, you know that you hear the word can and could very often in everyday conversation. So the word can is a very useful word. We use it to talk about things that we know how to do, things that we have permission to do, things that are possible. Could is also another modal verb that we use to express things that are possible, or maybe a past ability, as well as making suggestions and requests. So last week I did a lesson on conditionals. And one important note, if you watched last week's lesson, you can remember that I mentioned could can be used in a conditional sentence. Okay, so that's something very special about the modal verb could, is that we can use it in conditional sentences to talk about possibilities. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so can versus could. We use can and could to talk about things like abilities, things that we can do, request, to make a request to someone, asking for permission, allowed things, and also possibilities. So can and could can be used for all 5 of these things. Now, what's the difference? How do we know when to use which one? Let's start with ability. Ability. So when we're talking about things we can do in the present tense or in the future tense, we're going to use can. Can is used for present tense and future tense. However, if we are talking about something in the past, something that happened in the past or that we were able to do in the past, but now we can't do it today, we're going to use could. Okay, so could in this case is the past tense of can. So let's look at two examples. So can. She can speak 3 languages. She can speak 3 languages. This is a present tense sentence, and as you can see, can is followed by the base form of the verb speak. This is an ability she has, something that she is able to do. Okay, and for could, she could speak a little Spanish when she lived in Peru. So you notice the sentence is in past tense, right? Lived is simple past. So could is going to be used here because we are speaking in the past. So maybe she lived in Peru 20 years ago, and while she lived there, she could speak a little Spanish. But today, she has forgotten her Spanish. Okay, the next way we can use can and could is to make a request. To make a request. However, can is typically used to make an informal request. So if we want to request something from our friends or our families or someone that we know really well, we're going to use can because it's informal. However, if we have a request to make to our teachers or maybe someone we don't know so well or our boss at work, we are going to use could. Could is the formal version to make a request. So let's compare 2 examples. Can you pick me up from work at 3 o'clock? So we are assuming that we're asking maybe a friend or a family member if they can pick us up from work at 3 o'clock. This is an informal request. We're asking someone that we know or that we're familiar with. However, could is formal. So we would ask, could you please repeat the last example? Could you please repeat the last example? So maybe this is someone speaking to a teacher, and when we're speaking to a teacher or a professor, we use the formal version. We don't use the informal. So could you please repeat the last example? Okay, the next way we use can versus could is when we are asking for permission. Asking permission. And this is the same as the request. So for informal, when you're asking permission informally to someone that you know or someone you're familiar with, you will use can. However, if you want to keep it professional and formal, you will use could. So request and asking permission are essentially the same. Can is informal, could is formal. So we'll look at one more example. Can I go to my friend's house tonight? So maybe if any of you have children, they're asking for your permission to go to their friend's house. Can I go to my friend's house tonight? And our formal example, could I please be excused? Could I please be excused? Maybe you're in a meeting at work and you need to step out of the meeting for a moment. So you would ask permission in a formal way, saying, could I please be excused? All right. Moving along to our next way we use can and could is for allowed things. Allowed things. Things that we are allowed to do, okay? This can also maybe mean once we have gotten permission, we've asked permission first, and now we're allowed to do it. So allowed things can, we use can for present tense and future tense, and could is for past tense. So it's very similar to ability. Can is for present and future tense, and could is for past tense, okay? Let's look at an example. This is for allowed things. We can take a 1-hour lunch break each day at work. We can take. This means we're allowed to take a 1 hour lunch break each day at work. However, if we want to use this in the past, we could say, when I started working at my company, we could take a 2 hour lunch break. So this is in the past tense. So 2 years ago, we were allowed to take a 2 hour lunch break. When I started working at my company, we could take a 2 hour lunch break. But now we can only take a 1 hour lunch break. All right, moving into our fifth and last way of using can and could, is to talk about possibilities, okay? So when we use can, we're talking about a general possibility, something that happens in general or could possibly happen in general. And when we use could, we're talking about the possibility of a specific event. Okay, so can is for general, could is for something specific. So let's look at an example. In Antarctica, it can get as cold as negative 89 degrees Celsius. In Antarctica, it can get as cold as negative 89 degrees Celsius. That's very cold. So this is a general possibility. We're speaking in general in Antarctica. We're not saying a specific month or date. However, to talk about something specific, we could say, the weather forecast said the temperatures could be as high as 30 instead of can. It's because it's specific. Our key word is tomorrow. So tomorrow is a specific event. So we use could in this sentence. Very good. Okay, now I'd just like to talk a moment about how we make these negative. So can in the negative way just becomes can't or cannot. Both of these are correct. You can use both of these spellings. They both mean the same thing. And you will see both of them maybe in books that you read or articles that you read. So can't and cannot are the negatives of can. And the same way to use, so if we look at our first example, maybe I can change she can speak 3 languages to she can't speak Spanish. She can't speak Spanish. This is an ability that she doesn't have. That's how we make it negative. And for couldn't, I could change it to when she lived in Peru, she couldn't speak Spanish. When she lived in Peru, she couldn't speak Spanish. This is just the negative form of can and could. Okay, so let's do some practice. To make sure that you understand the difference between using can and could. So I'm going to hold up an example, okay? And in the chat, tell me if it should be can or if it should be could, okay? Are you ready? All right, so our first example is blank, I borrow your pencil. Blank, I borrow your pencil. So you're asking, we're assuming that you're in class and you're sitting by your best friend. So would you use can or could? I'll give you just a moment. Type your answers in the chat. Awesome. I see lots of correct answers coming through. So the answer should be can. Can. Can I borrow your pencil? So like I said, we're assuming you're in class and you're sitting beside your best friend. So your best friend, you're going to use the informal version of can. Now, if you were asking your boss, maybe you would say, hey boss, could I borrow your pencil, please? But can is the correct answer for this one. Okay, the next one. The next one. Blank, you tell me where the train station is. Blank, you tell me where the train station is. Would we use can or could in this question? So let's assume you're visiting a new city and you don't know where the train station is, so you must ask someone. You must ask someone where the train station is. Give me just a moment. Great, I see lots of Correct answers coming through. Okay, the answer to this one is going to be could. Could. Could you tell me where the train station is? Why do we use could? Because we are probably asking someone we don't know. We're asking a stranger, someone that's not familiar for us. So in this case, we need to use the formal version, which is could. Could you please tell me where the train station is? Very good. Okay, two more examples. I blank climbed trees when I was a child. I blank climbed trees when I was a child. So look for your keywords in this one. And I'll give you just a moment to type your answers in the chat. Wonderful. Okay, if you said could, you are correct. I could climb trees when I was a child. Why is it could? Because this was in the past, right? When I was a child is in the past, and we use could to talk about past abilities. Very good. Okay, and our last example. My best friend, blank, played the guitar and the drums. The very talented best friends. My best friend, blank, played the guitar and the drums. So would this one be can or could? Give me just a moment, type your answers in the chat. Very good. Okay, if you said can, I think I see a lot of cans. You are correct. So my best friend can play the guitar and the drums. Why do we use can? Because we are talking about an ability in the present tense, okay? And remember, if you want to make this negative, you could say, my best friend can't play the guitar. My best friend can't or cannot play the guitar. How you make it negative. Okay, all right, so now we're just going to take a moment. If you have any questions about can or could, please type them in the chat. If you don't have any questions, maybe let's practice. So create a sentence telling me an ability that you have, something that you can do. If anyone has any special talents, type them in the chat using can. Or if you had an ability in the past that you could do and you can't anymore, also type those in the chat. Practice using could. I'll wait just a moment and see if we have any questions before we move on to must and have to. Okay, someone's asking the difference between can and can't. So can is an ability, something that we are able to do. And when we use can't, it means that we are not able to do it. It's an inability. For example, I can play the guitar means I know how to play the guitar. I've learned how to play the guitar. But if I say I can't play the guitar or I cannot play the guitar, I don't know how. I've never learned. Maybe I should take guitar lessons. All right, let me wait just one more moment and see. Okay, someone's asking about watching the previous classes. So if you go to Cambly's YouTube channel, all of the previous live lessons are available for you to view. And after this lesson is finished, it will also be available for you to view on Cambly's YouTube channel. All right, we're going to move on. I don't see any more questions, I don't think. So we're going to move on to must and have to. Must and have to. If you hear some noises, it's my dog. She's saying hello. Okay, so must and have to we use when we're talking about obligations, mostly when we talk about obligations. It's important to note that must and have to can often be used interchangeably. So many times we can say the same sentence using must or have to, and both are correct. That's my other dog saying hello. Okay, however, there are some certain times or specific moments when must is better to use than have to, or when we need to use have to or has to instead of must. So let's take a look at the difference. Okay, so must we're going to use when we talk about internal obligations, something I feel like I need to do, internal obligations. We also use it to talk about rules and laws, something you must do because it's the law or a rule. Okay, we also talk about it to give recommendations about something. And so I know many of you have learned should to give recommendations. You can use should to give recommendations. However, must can also be used to give recommendations, but must is stronger than should. It is stronger than should. And we use must to talk about possibilities with a 99% probability or a 99% chance that it's true or happening. Okay, we'll look at some examples of each of these in just one moment. And have to can also be used for many of these ways, but the most important difference between must and have to is that must is used for internal obligations and have to is used for external obligations. So maybe there is a consequence, or maybe there's a reason why, an external reason why we have to do something. So let's look at an example. Okay, our first example, we're going to look at must versus have to, the internal obligation versus the external obligation. Okay, so must. I must clean this house. I woke up this morning and I said, I must clean this house. Nobody is telling me to clean my house, but I feel like it's dirty. This is an internal obligation. I feel like my house is very dirty and I must clean it. Okay, so this is an example of an internal obligation. However, if we use the same sentence with have to, you could say, I have to clean my house because my parents are visiting tonight. I have to clean my house because my parents are visiting tonight. So now there is an external obligation. What's the external obligation? It's that your parents are going to visit you. And so if you don't clean your house, they will probably tell you to clean your house, okay? So this is the difference between the internal obligation and the external obligation. Another example could be maybe you say, I must finish my essay tonight. You have homework, I must finish my essay tonight. It's not due tomorrow, but you feel like it needs to be done tonight. However, if the deadline for your essay is tomorrow, you would say, I have to finish my essay tonight. It's due tomorrow. That's the external obligation. Okay, that's the difference between must and have to. Now I'm going to show you some other examples of using must, how we use it with rules and laws, recommendations, and possibilities, okay? So let's start with rules and laws. An example could be, let's say you're traveling, you're on an airplane, and they say all electronic devices must be turned off during takeoff and landing. Okay, so the flight attendant announces that all electronic devices must be turned off during takeoff and landing. This is a rule. When you're on an airplane, this is a rule. You must turn off or put on airplane mode your electronic devices. So we use must. Okay, the next example would be a recommendation. And remember, for recommendations, we also use the modal verb should. However, if we feel like it's a stronger recommendation, we're going to use must. For example, if my friend is sick, I would say, if you have a fever, you must go to the doctor, okay? If I said you should go to the doctor, it's not as strong. But if you have a fever, you must go to the doctor. I'm strongly recommending that she goes to the doctor because she's sick. Okay, and possibilities. So we also use must with possibilities that have a 99% chance of being true. Okay, so for example, we could say, Andy is late for work. He must be stuck in traffic. Maybe he lives in Istanbul where there's a lot of traffic And maybe he's late often because of this traffic. So this means there's a high possibility he's stuck in traffic. So Andy is late for work. He must be stuck in traffic. He must be stuck in traffic. Okay, now I also want to talk about when we make must and have to negative, okay? Because they're very similar. They have very similar meanings in the positive way, but when we make them negative, they have different meanings, okay? So must becomes must not or mustn't. When we use must not or mustn't, we're talking about something that's not allowed. It's not allowed or it's strongly advised not to do it, okay? However, when we use don't have to, there is no obligation to do something. So this means you have a choice. You have a choice to make. There's no obligation. Okay, for example, I don't have to wake up early tomorrow. I don't have to wake up early tomorrow. I have a choice. There's no obligation. Maybe I don't have to work tomorrow, so I don't have to wake up early tomorrow. There's no obligation. I have the choice what time I can wake up. However, mustn't or must not, you say you mustn't talk during the exam. So maybe you're taking the IELTS exam or the TOEFL exam, and this is something that's not allowed. You're not allowed to talk during the exam. So the professor or the instructor would say you mustn't talk during the exam. You don't really have a choice. That's the difference between the negative versions of must not, and do not have to, or don't have to. Okay, now we're going to practice like we did with can versus could. I'm going to show you a sentence, and in the chat, tell me, should it be must, or should it be have or has to, okay? Are you ready? All right, our first example is, Sally didn't come to class today. She blank be sick. Sally didn't come to class today. She blank be sick. Let's say yesterday Sally told you she didn't feel well. Yesterday Sally called you and told you she didn't feel well. So would we use must or has to in this case? Give me just a moment. Very good. I see some great answers coming through. The answer is must. Must. Why? Because this is a very high possibility. Remember, she told you she didn't feel well yesterday, so it's a very high possibility that she's sick. She must be sick. Very good. Okay, our next example. I blank take my dog to the vet for a checkup today. I blank take my dog to the vet for a checkup today. I'll give you just a moment. Will we use must or have to? Must or have to? Let's say your dog needs to get her vaccines. Is this an internal obligation or an external obligation? Remember the difference between internal obligation and external obligation. Give me just one more moment. I see lots of correct answers. Very good. Okay. If you said have to, you are correct. If you said have to, you are correct. Why? Because this is an external obligation, right? It's not just that you feel like taking your dog to the vet, but she needs to go or he needs to go to the vet for a checkup. So this is an external obligation. Very good. Okay, let's look at our next example. If I want to pass my exam, I blank study a lot. If I want to pass my exam, I blank study a lot. Is there an internal obligation or an external obligation? You want to pass, right? So should it be must or have to? Must or have to? I see answers to both. This one's a little trickier. Okay, so in this case, actually must and have to could both be used. They're both correct. So I put have to, and I'll explain why in just a moment. So you could say, if I want to pass my exams, I have to study a lot. Why did I choose have to in this case? Because it's an external obligation, okay? So the external obligation is that you want to make a good grade in your class. You want to pass the class so that you can graduate. However, must is also correct. You might hear some people say, if I want to pass my exam, I must study a lot, because you feel internally like it's your job to study. You want to perform well on your exam, okay? So both are actually correct. However, in this case, I chose have to because of the external obligation of passing the class and graduating. Okay, we're going to do one more example, and then if you have any questions, you need any clarification, or you're confused, be typing your questions in the chat, okay? So our last example is, you blank visit Ecuador if you get the chance. You blank visit Ecuador if you get the chance. Ecuador is a beautiful country. So would I use must or have to? Must or have to? Give me just a moment. Must or have to? Okay, good. In this case, I used must. Now remember, before I started talking about must and have to, I said many times they can be used interchangeably. Okay, so in this example as well, both are okay to say. However, I chose must. Why? Because we used must when we're talking about a strong recommendation. So I'm strongly recommending that you visit Ecuador if you ever have the chance. However, you could also say you have to visit Ecuador if you get the chance, and both make sense. Okay, so let's take just a moment. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat really quickly. We'll go over again. Can and could are used to talk about ability, request, asking permission, allowed things, and possibilities. Must and have to are used to talk about obligations, and must can also be used to talk about rules and laws, strong recommendations, and very high possibilities, okay? When we use must not, we're talking about something that is not allowed, or it's strongly advised not to do it. However, don't have to or doesn't have to, there's no obligation to do something. You have the choice, okay? All right. I know there are other modal verbs that you're wanting to learn. However, today we're not going to have time to talk about the modal verbs like would and should and may. Maybe in another lesson, we can cover some other modal verbs. And also, please remember, once this live lesson finishes, it will be available to watch again. So if you tuned in late, or if you just need to watch it again because you didn't understand something, you can go to YouTube's, Cambly's YouTube channel, and the video will be available to watch again. Okay, today we also have a promo code. So for those of you who are not familiar with what Cambly is, I know many of you are already students on Cambly, but if you don't know what Cambly is, it is a platform to learn English and practice your English. We have tutors from many different countries that are native English speakers who focus on things like improving your conversation, pronunciation, grammar, business English, exam preparation, and you can find a tutor available 24 hours a day. So any time of the day, you will be able to find a tutor on Cambly to speak with, okay? It's one-on-one practice. And so our promo code for today, if you're not already joined in with Cambly, the promo code is going to be modal, because today we talked about modal verbs. And you can find this promo code in the link in the description after we finish this video. This is it for today. I hope that you understand the clear difference between can and could, must and have to. I want to say thank you so much to all of you who took the time out of your morning or afternoon or evening to tune in and watch our live lesson today. I hope to see you next time, and I hope the rest of you enjoy all of your day. See you next time.